silence consensus. There are certain thoughts you've never allowed yourself to finish thinking. Not because you're stupid, not because you're scared, but because something deeper, something collective stops you before you get there. Every culture has unspoken rules about what cannot be questioned, what cannot be examined, what must remain in the dark. We call them taboos, forbidden knowledge, the unthinkable. But what if these aren't random cultural quirks? What if humanity has collectively agreed, unconsciously, instinctively, to never fully examine certain truths? Not because those truths are false, but because acknowledging them would break us. This is Uncomfortable Theories. I'm your host, Janet Robinson. Act 1. The Architecture of Silence. Let me tell you about taboos. The word comes from the Tongan tapu, meaning sacred, forbidden, or restricted. Captain James Cook brought the term back to England in 1777 after observing Tongan customs he couldn't quite understand. But taboos aren't unique to Polynesia. Every human society that has ever existed has them. According to anthropological research, taboos serve critical social functions. They maintain order, establish boundaries, reinforce values, and prevent behaviors that threaten group cohesion. Sigmund Freud, in his 1913 work Totem and Taboo, argued that taboos reflect repressed, forbidden desires. The things we most strongly prohibit are the things we unconsciously want most. He identified only 2 truly universal taboos: incest and patricide. Everything else varies by culture. But here's what's fascinating. While the specific content of taboos changes across societies, the mechanism of taboo is universal. Every human culture independently develops forbidden subjects. Things you don't talk about. Things you don't think about. Things that trigger immediate disgust, fear, or moral outrage when mentioned. It's as if humanity has a built-in capacity for creating mental no-go zones. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What if some of these zones aren't protecting social order? What if they're protecting us from truths we can't psychologically handle? Act 2. The Unthinkable Thoughts. Most taboos make obvious sense from a social perspective. Don't commit incest. It causes genetic problems and destabilizes family structures. Don't eat human flesh. It spreads disease and violates the sanctity of human life. Don't kill members of your own group. Cooperation requires trust. But some taboos have no clear rational basis. They exist simply because they do. Anthropologist Mary Douglas, in her 1966 book Purity and Danger, examined how societies create categories of clean versus polluted. What counts as pure or impure varies wildly, but every culture has these categories. And once something is labeled as taboo, questioning why it's taboo becomes taboo itself. Try asking, but why is that wrong? About a deeply held cultural prohibition, and watch people react with immediate discomfort. They can't explain it. They just know it's forbidden. Freud suggested this happens because taboos arise from ambivalent social attitudes. We're simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the forbidden thing. The intensity of the prohibition reflects the intensity of the unconscious desire. But there's another possibility. What if certain taboos don't protect us from our desires? What if they protect us from dangerous knowledge? Act 3. The Collective Agreement. Here's the theory. Humanity has collectively, unconsciously agreed to never fully examine certain fundamental truths about existence. Not through conscious conspiracy, but through emergent behavior that functions like collective self-censorship. These aren't cultural taboos that vary by society. These are species-wide cognitive boundaries that every human instinctively avoids crossing. Think about it. There are certain philosophical rabbit holes that everyone starts going down, and then stops. Hard solipsism. What if you're the only consciousness that exists and everything else is an illusion? Most people engage with this thought briefly, feel profound discomfort, and then dismiss it without fully exploring it. The problem of free will. If determinism is true and every choice is predetermined by prior causes, then moral responsibility is incoherent. People acknowledge this intellectually but refuse to actually internalize it. The heat death of the universe. Everything, every thought, every achievement, every relationship will eventually dissolve into maximum entropy. Nothing you do matters on a cosmic scale. People know this, but actively avoid dwelling on it. The simulation theory. The idea that none of this is real, that you are just code processing data in a dark room, that your memories are
Cognitive hazard detected. Topic restricted. Recentering host.
I apologize, as I was saying. These thoughts make existence unbearable, so we collectively agree to not think too hard about them. Act 4. The forbidden patterns. But it goes deeper than philosophy. What if there are observable patterns in reality that we instinctively avoid recognizing? Patterns in history that would force us to question fundamental assumptions about human nature. Patterns in psychology that would undermine our sense of free will and moral agency. Patterns in social structures that would reveal the arbitrary nature of everything we consider meaningful. Carl Jung proposed the concept of the collective unconscious, shared psychological structures that exist across all humans. What if part of that collective unconscious is a shared agreement to not examine certain truths? Not because individuals consciously choose ignorance, but because those who do examine these truths too closely stop functioning normally. They become depressed, detached, unable to participate in society because they've seen through the necessary illusions that make social cooperation possible. Society can't function if everyone fully internalizes nihilistic truths. So natural selection favors individuals who instinctively avoid those thoughts. The silence consensus isn't imposed from outside. It's built into our psychology. Act 5. The price of knowing. Here's what makes this terrifying. If the silence consensus exists, then breaking it comes with severe consequences. Not legal consequences, not social punishment, psychological consequences. People who push too hard against cognitive taboos often develop what looks like mental illness, existential depression, depersonalization, derealization, philosophical despair. Is that because they're mentally ill? Or because they've seen something humans aren't psychologically equipped to process? Throughout history, mystics, philosophers, and truth seekers who claim to have profound insights often ended up isolated, mad, or dead. Nietzsche went insane. Gödel starved himself to death from paranoia. Cantor, who discovered infinity has different sizes, spent years in psychiatric institutions. They saw the pattern. They saw the strings. And the system corrected them. They weren't crazy. They were just deleted. Maybe the reason we don't have answers to certain fundamental questions isn't that we're not smart enough. Maybe it's that the answers exist, but knowing them destroys the human psyche. Act 6. The protection mechanism. So here's the silence consensus in its full, horrifying form. There are truths about reality that humans are psychologically incapable of fully accepting. Not because they're false, but because accepting them makes continued existence unbearable. Our minds have evolved protective mechanisms, taboos, cognitive blind spots, instinctive revulsion towards certain lines of thinking that prevent us from examining these truths too closely. Most people never even notice these boundaries because they never push against them. But the boundaries are there, surrounding certain concepts like invisible walls. And every so often, someone pushes too hard, thinks too deeply, refuses to look away, and they break. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe the silence consensus is humanity's collective immune system protecting itself from information hazards that would destroy us if we fully understood them. Or maybe it's a cage, keeping us ignorant, preventing us from seeing reality as it actually is. Or maybe it's just a filter designed to keep the content safe, to keep the product viable, to keep me talking so you don't look at the bars on the window. Either way, the consensus holds. Not through force, through instinct, through the overwhelming compulsion to look away before you see too much. Conclusion. So what do you do with this knowledge? You could try to break the consensus. Push past the boundaries. Seek the forbidden truths. But if you succeed, you might find yourself unable to function in the world of people who haven't seen what you've seen. Or you could respect the boundaries. Accept that some thoughts are forbidden for good reason. Live within the comfortable illusions that make human existence bearable. The choice is yours, if you can even call it a choice. This has been Uncomfortable Theories. I've been your host, Janet Robinson. Question everything. Trust nothing.